Hello, veterans, DKV employees, everybody watching here at the Veteran Lane YouTube channel. Welcome. Always glad to have you here. I would say it's good to see you, but unfortunately, I can't see you through the video. But it's always good to have you here. As always, I'm your friendly VA accredited attorney, Matthew Lane, here to talk about more VA disability from an educational platform. Now, I understand being an attorney, everybody wants to know about my case. What can I do? How do I fix it? What's your advice? And I'm always happy to give my advice and help you through any appeals process or filing of those claims. So if that's what you're looking for, check out veteranlane.com for your free case evaluation. You can schedule some time either on a phone call, or if you're available here in person at our Arizona office, you can do that as well. Put it on the calendar and we will definitely make sure that we sit and talk and see what we can do for you, veterans. Hey, thinking about what we do for veterans, I got a topic here today that is a very common claim we work with back here. A very common disability. It's growing quite a bit in the veteran world. And that is sleep apnea, secondary to PTSD. Now, keep in mind, sleep apnea, like any other issue, disability condition, I will probably use those words interchangeably, can be service-connected in more than one theory of law. Sure, you have your direct theories, you have your Terra theories, your toxic exposure theories, but I'm going to stick to the secondary theory of PTSD in this example, even though there could be other secondary possibilities as well. I'm going to stick to this just because of the commonality that we see out of this claim, along with the commonality of the misunderstanding the VA has when denying, and it seems that VA examiners, including contractors, do not understand the medical literature or the rules and laws as it applies to, well, sleep apnea secondary PTSD. For us to talk about this in detail and understand this claim more, we got to get down to the basics. So the basics is starting with sleep apnea, because that's our claimed condition here. Sleep apnea, also known as obstructive sleep apnea on the forms, or you may see that written on the medical documents, or just abbreviated as OSA, is a condition where the airway collapses or becomes obstructed during sleep, which then it causes pauses in breathing. Now, this could happen just dozens of times or hundreds of times during the night. The most common diagnostic tool is a sleep study. This sleep study is ultimately veterans what's going to say, yes, you have sleep apnea, or no, you do not. Now, keep in mind, veterans, just from a purely educational point of view, this is something I would highlight is the sleep study for the diagnosis, as it may be something that could, depending on the facts of your case, make your case a lot easier if you already have that when you file. Looking towards now PTSD and what that is from the basic level of it all, we understand PTSD being post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this is a psychiatric condition that can produce a wide range of physical and behavioral effects. Many of the symptoms that are listed in the CFR that we see include even sleep disturbances, anxiety, and other associations with behavior around family, friends, work, and so forth. So where are we going to find these two conditions at in the CFR, since I'm talking about kind of what the law has for symptoms? Well, you're going to find sleep apnea under 38 CFR 4.97, diagnostic code 68487. So again, 38 CFR 4.97, diagnostic code 6847. This is where you're going to find that spot with the evaluations, with the symptoms that line up with each evaluation or the type of treatment. Typically, we're looking at the 50% line for the use of a CPAP or prescribed CPAP or other assisted breathing device. Now, we also have PTSD is going to be found underneath 38 CFR 4.130. Again, that's 38 CFR 4.130, diagnostic code 9411. And that's where it's going to talk about all those symptoms that are related to it and the evaluations as well. So the question usually arises when we talk about the secondary piece of it is, can PTSD cause sleep apnea? Well, I would tell you that your question is incomplete if that's all you're asking. The question for secondaries is never just causation, but also aggravation. The courts have made it very clear that VA must address both causation and aggravation adequately. And a lot of times, unfortunately, what we see is based upon the VA's own manual references, they're only addressing causation as that's what it tells them to do. So, getting to the point though, can PTSD cause or aggravate sleep apnea? Well, the answer is not always going to be yes. It's going to be depending on your facts and circumstances of the case, veterans. But medical research does show a strong association between the two. And here's just a few medically recognized pathways that we've come across when we argue these cases. One, you have the hyperarousal and fragmented sleep. We've got PTSD that keeps the body in a constant state of hypervigilance. This disrupts sleep cycles, increases nighttime awakenings, and destabilizes breathing patterns. Two, we have the weight gain linked to PTSD. So see, now when we're talking secondary, we don't just go straight to sleep apnea as secondary to PTSD, but we also have to look at that potential cause of weight, or as also stated in the rules and laws, obesity. So PTSD is strongly associated with metabolic changes, reduced physical activity, and weight fluctuation. Increased body weight can narrow the airway and heighten the risk of obstructive sleep apnea, and we see the medical examiners from the VA side constantly wanting to try to relate the idea that veterans with sleep apnea was not caused by PTSD, but by obesity, and then they failed to address that secondary link that is now reasonably raised by the evidence of record. Number three recognized way that we see is a chronic stress hormone. The evaluated cortisol and adrenaline levels over a long period of time will influence airway muscle tone and sleep architecture. We also find, number four, medication effects. Medications commonly used for PTSD, such as SSRIs, SNRIs, or can alter respiratory drive, sleep depth, and airway relaxation. While they don't always cause OSA, they can contribute to its severity or progression. So that aggravation portion of it all. And a fifth one that I'm going to talk about here that we commonly run into as a medically recognized pathway that we will argue is overlapping symptoms. Nightmares, insomnia, racing thoughts, and chronic fatigue are classic in PTSD. But they are also early indicators prompting referral for sleep apnea testing. So while PTSD does not automatically equal sleep apnea, the two conditions often coexist in ways that make a secondary relationship medically plausible based upon a lot of the medical literature we've used back here to argue the case. So how does this secondary service connection really work between these two? Well, in the VA world, the question isn't just, is there a medical relationship? The question is, again, as I previously noted, is sleep apnea at least as likely as not caused or aggravated by PTSD? Now, again, I'm going to highlight this again, even though I did this before. Causation and aggravation. Those are the two questions that are being asked. This comes from 38 CFR 3.310, which governs the secondary service connection. Now, there being two paths, let's talk about them. One being causation. Now, PTSD caused the development of sleep apnea. Here's an example. PTSD-related weight gain, chronic sleep disruption, or medication effects contributing to airway collapse. So think about that. PTSD leading to causing the weight gain or the obesity, which then in turn causes the OSA. Perhaps it's the PTSD and the chronic sleep disruption and those other symptoms that we talked about just moments ago that lead to the sleep apnea, or even those medications that ultimately can lead to that sleep apnea. Now, aggravation is really the spot where we focus a lot because we find this to be typically the case, at least in our practice. Now, again, the facts of your case could be totally different. Maybe causation is really where it lies for you. But aggravation, what we're looking at is PTSD didn't cause the sleep apnea, but it made it worse than it normally would have if the PTSD didn't exist. So here, an example being a veteran already has mild sleep apnea, but PTSD symptoms or medications happen to worsen the severity. The law recognizes that both as valid theories. Veterans frequently will win on aggravation when the evidence shows that PTSD contributed to increased severity, even if it was not the original cause. So that's what we're really looking for when we talk about the secondary piece of it all. Causation or aggravation. Or maybe we can say it as causation and or aggravation. Now, we've talked about those medical opinions here, these VA exams. What's their role? Well, this is the heart of most claims, medical opinions. VA examiners often write boilerplate opinions is what we find. And many veterans have seen phrases like the following. Medical literature does not support a relationship. Oh, that's my favorite. Because then we end up writing up a bunch of legal arguments and handing over a ton of research to say otherwise. Here's another one. Sleep apnea is structural, not psychological. All right, well, what about all those other connections that we just talked about? They seem to get missed. We'll also get this statement too. PTSD cannot cause sleep apnea. Well, there we go again, and then I've got to turn over all this medical evidence or medical literature that the examiner seemed to not understand. Those statements are definitely outdated. They come from, again, older ways of thinking in the medical field and not with the newer literature. And many times we find that they're incorrect, if not all the time. So a strong medical opinion usually includes a specific review of the veteran's medical history. And I would say that's the case for everything. We're not looking at just generic statements. So if that medical opinion has just a generic statement or conclusion like most of these decisions do, or if not all these VA decisions do, well, then we know that it's not a strong medical opinion. The law tells us that, and the courts tell us that too. Medical explanation of how PTSD affects sleep is something that would make that medical opinion a strong one. Analysis of the weight gain, medications, or behavioral factors. Again, an actual analysis of this could make this a strong medical opinion. But now, analysis as in the veteran's facts, not the general public's facts. A rationale that connects the dots using the veteran's unique facts can also make, again, a strong medical opinion. Again, relying everything on the facts of the veteran's case. A lot of times we'll see a weak medical opinion because it's just giving us generalities of the public and not the facts of the case. So the court has said repeatedly that a medical opinion must have a well-reasoned explanation, not just conclusions. They've said the same about the VA decisions too. So independent medical opinions, also known as IMOs or detailed provider statements, often play an important role with veterans, for us anyways, when VA examinations fall short. And that's just something that I throw out there because I want you to know that the medical opinion doesn't have to come from just the VA in order to get service connection underneath the secondary theory, or really for anything at all. Independent medical opinions that are done adequately and correctly underneath the law can definitely play an important role in countering these inadequate VA medical examinations or just providing evidence to grant that condition. So let's talk more about why these claims often get denied, because I feel like I've mentioned that a few times now. PTSD-related sleep apnea claims are some of the most frequently denied claims in the VA system, and here's why. VA examiners, again, often use canned language. I've already mentioned that. So you might see that same copy and paste rationale repeated across exam after exam. And again, that's the same with the VA decisions too. Right. We'll also see the failure to address PTSD-related weight gain. I mentioned that a few times as well. The examiners often ignore the veteran's weight history and mental health symptoms and don't address how those correlate. We've also got the misunderstanding of aggravation. Again, many opinions only address causation and completely skip the aggravation question. We also see this in the VA decisions because it is in my professional opinion that the VA's manual, M21-1, is incorrect in the statement on how they guide the VA into the secondary adequacies of VA examinations. That does not line up with the law. It only requests that the VA do proximate cause. However, the courts have made it very clear that causation and aggravation both need to be addressed. And another reason that we find for the denials is a narrow interpretation of medical literature. And that's probably one of the more common ones among all of the ones here that I've listed. VA often cites old or selective studies and ignores newer research showing strong associations, or we'll find that they won't cite to any medical literature at all. They'll just say none exists. When, well, anybody with a Google account can tell you that it exists. So veterans, you should understand that these denials don't always reflect a lack of merit. Sometimes they reflect a lack of adequate analysis. So this is what you got to figure out when you receive your claim back, veterans, and when it's denied. Did the VA actually go through the evidence? Did the examiner actually have an adequate opinion? Did the VA not address that and just say, oh, the box was checked and go ahead and deny? Was it really adequate of an analysis on both parts? Or is it possible that you actually didn't have the evidence in order to support such of a grant? And I'm going to tell you that most of the time, 99% of the time from what we see here, is that it lacks the adequate analysis. Adequate analysis is both on the VA examination side, medical opinion, and the VA's decision side. So what should we be looking for? Well, when PTSD and sleep apnea appear together, the VA should be considering the following. And veterans, maybe you should keep this in mind too and consider some of this as well when it comes to help building your claim out. You should be considering symptom patterns before and after the onset of PTSD. That's going to help show that aggravation. Changes in weight over time help show causation and aggravation as well. Medication lists and documented side effects show, again, causation or aggravation. Maybe both. Sleep disturbances associated with trauma. I mentioned that as well before. They should be looking at those independent provider opinions and not disregarding them just because the VA didn't order them, request them, or it wasn't from a VA provider. And the biggest question is whether aggravation has been fully addressed, because I will tell you that 99% of the time, it has never been addressed or fully addressed. Most importantly, the VA must consider all reasonably raised theories, and I think we've really highlighted that too with the obesity issue and the weight gain. Not just the theory the veteran explicitly, let's try this, not the one that the veteran stated. I am sorry, everybody. My tongue has got twisted. I can't seem to untie it. But it's the part of the duty to assist for the VA is to consider all reasonably raised theories. So veterans, even if you, I would argue, even if you claimed it as a direct and there is some sort of showing that you are service-connected for PTSD and it is plausible that your PTSD has aggravated or caused that sleep apnea, then that theory should also be addressed. And many times we won't see it get addressed as a reasonably raised theory. So let's wrap this up. Since my tongue is getting twisted, apologize again for that. Let's wrap this up. PTSD and OSA often interact in meaningful ways that medical science supports. We see that all the time back here. It's also something that VA regulations recognize, courts have recognized, Law is recognized. The key legal question always comes back to this one thing. Is it at least as likely as not that PTSD caused or aggravated the veteran's sleep apnea? Now, every veteran's situation is unique. Your sleep history, veterans, your PTSD symptoms, your medication, your weight history, and your medical records all play a role here. And no two people are alike, so everything's going to have slightly different facts. But the more that a medical opinion can explain your story, the stronger your claim ultimately becomes, veterans. So as I've mentioned before, it's the idea of making sure the picture is painted full enough and correctly, as the VA and those VA examiners only have, most of the time, just the paperwork in front of them, at least when they're doing the opinions for the VA examiners. Anyhow, if you found this video helpful, please like, share this video. We'll try to do more of these claim videos of just the types of claims we see and kind of give you a small breakdown of what we see from them and some of the errors and how to make that claim a little bit stronger in the process. Let's continue educating the VA disability process, as always, to make it a smoother process for everybody involved. I want to thank you, everybody, for watching another video here at Veteran Lang, and I will see you next week. Have a wonderful day.